The cleansing of the temple. On Monday morning, Jesus and the apostles gathered early as planned at the house of Simon in Bethany, and after a brief discussion, they set out for Jerusalem. The 12 were unusually silent as they traveled. They had not yet recovered from the experiences of the previous day. As the group descended the Mount of Olives, Jesus walked ahead, and the apostles followed closely behind him, silent and deep in thought. The dominant thought in each of them, except Judas Iscariot, was, "What will the Master do today?" The thought occupying Judas was, "What will I do? Will I stay with Jesus and my companions, or will I withdraw? And if I break with them, how should I do it?" At about 9 o'clock on this beautiful morning, these men arrived at the temple. They went directly to the great courtyard, and after greeting those present, Jesus climbed onto one of the platforms and began addressing the people who gathered around. Around Passover, there was always a large trade in sacrificial animals. Although it was permitted for a Jew to bring his own sacrificial animal, the animal had to be free from any blemish, as prescribed in the Levitical laws. This was verified by official temple inspectors. Many Jews had experienced the humiliation of having their animals, which they believed to be perfect, rejected. As a result, it had become common practice for Jews to buy pre-approved sacrificial animals in Jerusalem. Although various places on the nearby Mount of Olives were used for trading livestock during the Passover week, it had become customary to trade these sacrificial animals directly from the temple. Pens were built next to the temple square, where the animals to be traded were kept. Thus, there was always an extensive livestock trade around the temple during the Passover. Because the perfect sacrificial animals were scarce, and because the temple traders had a monopoly on approved sacrificial animals, they could sell them at exorbitant prices. They could demand high prices because there was always a buyer. The advantage they offered to pilgrims was that their sacrificial animals could be offered immediately, so the pilgrim did not have to walk around with an animal for several days. However, trading in sacrificial animals was not the only way money was made in the temple square. Around Passover, many Jews from the diaspora were in the city, and the only currency that could be used in the temple area was the Jewish shekel. Thus, many money changers were active, setting up a small market in the temple square during Passover. This had come about as follows. During the Hasmonean dynasty, the Jews began minting their own silver coins. Since then, it had been established by law that the temple tax and all other payments around the temple could only be made in this Jewish currency. This made it necessary to license money changers to exchange the various currencies from all the provinces of the Roman Empire for this local silver shekel. The temple tax that every adult man had to pay was half a shekel. Amidst this noisy gathering of money changers, merchants, and livestock traders, Jesus tried that Monday morning to preach the gospel of the heavenly kingdom. He was not the only one who was disturbed by the desecration of the temple. The common people, and especially visitors from foreign lands, were deeply offended by the profanation of their national house of worship for profit. Moreover, they were forced to do business there because there was no alternative available, and everyone realized that they were being cheated by clever Jewish temple families. As Jesus was about to begin his speech, two things happened that caught his attention. At the table of a nearby money changer, a heated argument broke out because a Jew from Alexandria felt cheated by the money changer. Simultaneously, the bellowing of a herd of about 100 oxen echoed as they were driven from one section of the animal pens to another. Forced by the noise to wait, Jesus silently observed this scene of trading. Suddenly, he recognized a man from Galilee in the market, a man he knew to be somewhat simple-minded. This simple soul was being mocked by a group of men who were pushing him back and forth for their own amusement. As Jesus took it all in, a holy indignation arose in his soul. To the amazement of those present, he resolutely descended from the platform, approached a boy who was moving the cattle, took his whip, and drove the cattle away from the temple square. But this was only the beginning. Before the eyes of the astonished crowd, he opened all the animal pens and drove the animals out. The people who saw this were filled with enthusiasm, and with wild cries they stormed the market and began overturning the money changers' tables. Within 5 minutes, the entire marketplace was swept out of the temple. By the time the Roman guard arrived, everything was quiet again, and the crowd had calmed down. Humanly speaking, it was a small miracle that the people did not go on to riot and start looting. However, the audience present were mainly pilgrims. They had high morals, and after the cleansing, they immediately began ensuring peace around the temple. Jesus returned to the speaker's platform and addressed the crowd. "Today, you have witnessed what is written in the Scriptures. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." The crowd burst into loud cheers, which turned into hosannas and songs of praise. A group of young boys broke away from the crowd, and they began spontaneously dancing and singing. The people were proud and grateful, showing their appreciation in this way. Finally, the profane, profit-driven traders had been expelled from the holy temple. By now, some priests had arrived, and one of them said to Jesus, "Do you hear what these children are singing?" But Jesus replied, "Have you never read, 'Out of the mouths of babes and infants you have perfected praise'?" That day, the people embraced Jesus, allowing him to teach without interruption. They organized themselves to stand guard at every entrance to prevent even an empty vessel from being rolled through the temple grounds. The rest of the day, peace and calm reigned in the temple courts, and the people listened to Jesus' preaching. They hung on his every word. This astonishing action of Jesus was completely beyond the comprehension of his apostles. They were so stunned by this sudden, unexpected move of the Master that they remained close together near the platform throughout the entire event. Even Peter did not move a muscle. They had not lifted a hand to help with the cleansing of the temple. Had this spectacular event occurred a day earlier, when Jesus triumphantly arrived at the temple on the donkey's colt, they would have been at the forefront. But now, as it happened in this way, they were completely unprepared to participate. This action of cleansing the temple is a condemnation by Jesus of the commercialization of religious practices. This event also demonstrates that Jesus does not necessarily condemn the use of force when it is used against the unjust oppression by an unfair monopoly, especially when it is entrenched behind political, financial, or ecclesiastical power. One should not allow cunning, corrupt, and deceitful people to organize themselves so they can exploit and oppress those who, due to their idealism, are not inclined to defend themselves.